From the outside, our house looked like any other in our peaceful Seattle suburb, the lawn perfectly trimmed, the Halloween pumpkins still lingering beside the front porch, and white holiday lights already coiled neatly around the roofline, waiting for December. Our neighbors often said how lucky my parents were to have such wonderful daughters. The photographs inside, smiling faces at Disneyland, perfectly staged Christmas mornings, all painted the same picture. But like a glossy magazine cover, it was paper thin. I learned early that perfection wasn't a privilege, it was an expectation. When I was 5, Sophie knocked over the crystal vase in the living room while chasing our dog. Before my mother even appeared, I was already gathering the shattered pieces, carefully cradling the glass in my tiny hands. My mother's heels clicked sharply against the hardwood as she entered. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice tight. Without hesitation, I replied, "I did it." I didn't even think. It was instinct: protect Sophie, protect the calm. Later that night, as I quietly read in my room, I heard my mother on the phone with one of her friends. "Rebecca, sorry, I mean Olivia. She's always so eager to please. Not like Sophie. Sophie has spirit." Spirit. That word became a constant in our home. When Sophie threw tantrums at the grocery store or refused to eat her broccoli, it was called spirit. When I quietly did my homework and followed every rule, I was reliable. Somehow, her defiance earned admiration, while my obedience was met with nods and dismissive smiles. The differences seemed small at first, like cracks in plaster. Sophie got the bigger bedroom with the bay window. She chose the restaurants for family nights. Her school projects, while rushed and incomplete, decorated the fridge, while my carefully drawn diagrams and essays were filed away in a kitchen drawer. I once asked my father why my report card with straight A's didn't warrant the same celebration as Sophie's B- in biology. He simply smiled and said, "You're naturally good at school, sweetheart. Sophie needs more encouragement." By the time I was a teenager, I no longer questioned it. I simply tried harder. I believed, perhaps foolishly, that if I was exceptional enough, they would love me the way they loved her. But even perfection couldn't cover everything. One night in late November of 2015, as the drizzle painted soft patterns against my window, I tiptoed downstairs for a glass of water. The house was quiet except for the low hum of voices coming from the kitchen. I paused when I heard my parents arguing, the sharpness in their voices slicing through the calm like the rain slicing the night. "You've always favored Sophie," my mother hissed. "It's like you're trying to compensate for Olivia not being yours," she added sharply. "She's not yours either, Eleanor," my father shot back, his tone bitter. We agreed when we took her in that we'd never treat her differently. The glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor beneath me. The voices stopped instantly. I froze, my breath shallow, hoping the shadows would hide me. After a moment, I darted back upstairs, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the sound of their footsteps following. The next morning, I sat at the breakfast table, my cereal slowly turning soggy, as though nothing had happened. But everything had. My father rustled his newspaper. My mother sipped her coffee. "I heard you last night," I said softly, my voice steadier than I expected. "I know I'm adopted." There was a beat of silence. My mother glanced briefly at my father, then smiled, a tight, strained curve that never reached her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous, Olivia. You must have had a strange dream. We've always been your parents." And just like that, the door closed. The truth, as it often did in our house, became something inconvenient, something to be buried under pleasant conversation and well-rehearsed smiles. I learned that day that in our home, Appearance mattered more than reality. Love wasn't something freely given, it was earned and measured. I buried my questions, my doubts, and threw myself deeper into school, into perfect grades, perfect extracurriculars, and perfect manners. If I couldn't be loved for who I was, maybe they'd value what I could achieve. Dorothy, my grandmother, was the only one who seemed to see beyond the performance. She lived just across town in a warm old Victorian house filled with cinnamon, books, and soft lamplight. She would invite me over on weekends, offering cocoa topped with too much whipped cream, and together we'd sit in her sunroom reading. "You have your mother's eyes, sweetheart," she said softly one evening while flipping through an old photo album. Her words hovered for a moment, deliberate but gentle. I looked up at her, heart pounding. "My mother." She reached over and patted my hand, her voice soothing. "Someone who loved you very much, but who couldn't keep you." I wanted to ask more, to press her for answers that my parents refused to give. But Dorothy would always promise, "One day, when you're older. When the time is right." That time never seemed to come. And so I carried the questions silently, folding them away like letters never sent. If love here required perfection, then I would strive for nothing less. Success became my currency for love, but they never cashed it in. By the summer of 2020, I was 25, standing in my own corner office overlooking downtown Seattle. The skyline glittered under the soft sun, and I almost allowed myself to feel proud. My company, Novamed AI, had just secured its first round of major funding for an artificial intelligence platform designed to assist doctors in diagnostic decisions. It was cutting edge, something I had built from scratch with Rachel by my side. Rachel Evans was more than my business partner. She had quietly become my lifeline. We met during our sophomore year at the University of Washington. While others saw my drive as intimidating or obsessive, Rachel understood. She often joked that I was fueled by ambition while she supplied the caffeine. But underneath her humor was a steady kindness I'd grown to depend on. "You know you can breathe now, right?" Rachel said that morning, setting down a large iced coffee on my desk. "Funding secured. Investors happy. You might want to celebrate before you burn a hole through your keyboard." I smiled, grateful for her gentle nudging. Old habits. Rachel leaned against the edge of my desk, studying me. "Or old wounds," she said softly. She never pushed, but she saw me. Far more than my own parents ever did. The press releases went out later that week. Forbes ran a short feature. Tech journals praised the promise of our platform. And as always, my parents made sure to attend every public event where they could bask in the reflected glow of my accomplishments. At one of the launch receptions, my mother beamed for the cameras, her arm looped around mine, squeezing just tight enough to remind me of her presence. "We're so proud of our daughter," she told reporters, her practiced smile never faltering. My father stood nearby, chatting with investors, slipping in phrases like, "Olivia always had a head for numbers." Just like me. Yet once the photographers left, their attention drifted elsewhere, as it always did. My victories were props, my emotions remained invisible. Dorothy, however, found me after the event, pulling me aside to a quiet corner of the venue. "You've built something remarkable, Olivia," she said, her voice low and warm. She handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate pendant, an opal encircled by tiny diamonds. "It belonged to your mother," she whispered. My breath caught. "You mean my birth mother?" Dorothy nodded gently. "Yes, Caroline. She would have been so proud of you." I closed the box slowly, my fingers trembling. "Why haven't you told me more?" Her eyes softened, carrying a mixture of love and hesitation. When the time is right, sweetheart. And soon, I promise. But soon always seemed to stretch into someday. That fall, Thanksgiving arrived with its usual obligations. We gathered at my parents' house, where Eleanor had orchestrated a flawless table cape, fine china, tapered candles, and cloth napkins folded like swans. Outside, golden leaves blanketed the yard, though none dared linger on the pristine walkway. Sophie sat across from me, her face flushed from long hours at the hospital, where she was deep into her medical residency. She had grown into an intelligent, capable woman, though our paths rarely crossed anymore. Dinner began with polite small talk, patient cases for Sophie, company updates for me, though most of the conversation revolved, as usual, around Sophie's world. My achievements were acknowledged but quickly redirected. At one point, my mother chuckled as she served the pumpkin pie. "You've always been so driven, Olivia. Always trying to prove something." Her words slipped into the air like a knife wrapped in silk. I forced a smile. "I'm simply doing what I love." Sophie glanced at me then, her brows knitting for a brief moment. It was subtle, but I saw it, the flicker of realization, perhaps the first time she noticed the imbalance. As we cleared the dishes, my father poured himself another glass of wine, the rich burgundy swirling inside the crystal. His voice carried casually across the table, as if discussing the weather. "Of course, Olivia knows she's adopted, doesn't she?" The words landed like an earthquake in my chest. The room froze. My mother's smile stiffened, her eyes darting to mine, calculating. I sat perfectly still, gripping the edge of the table to ground myself. Sophie's mouth parted slightly, confused and startled. Dorothy, sitting quietly at the far end, placed her napkin in her lap, her face unreadable but her fingers tense. My voice came out steady, though my heartbeat roared in my ears. "Yes, I know." My father waved his hand dismissively, as if brushing away an inconvenience. "Good. Then there's no need for these long-standing secrets, is there?" Eleanor's voice chimed in quickly, too brightly. "We never wanted you to feel different, darling. That's why we never discussed it. It was always better this way." I stared at them, at the two people who had built their lives on half-truths and performance. For 20 years, they had let me carry this weight in silence, pretending reality didn't exist unless it served their narrative. The weight of those years threatened to crush me, but I swallowed hard, forcing down the rising sting behind my eyes. This was not the time. Not yet. Because even then, I sensed it, the storm hadn't even started. 15 minutes. That's all it should have taken to get home. Instead, it nearly cost me my life. The rain had been steady all day, a soft drizzle tapping against the tall windows of our downtown office. Rachel had left hours ago, urging me for the third time to pack up and go home. "Olivia, the update can wait until morning." "Go. Rest," she said, standing in the doorway with her bag slung over her shoulder. "You've already worked 12 hours straight." "I just want to run one last set of simulations," I replied, offering a tired smile. "I'll be right behind you." She shook her head, but didn't argue further. That was our rhythm. She knew when to push and when to let me run myself into the ground. By the time I finally powered down my computer, it was well past 10. The streets outside shimmered under the glow of streetlights, reflections rippling across the rain-slicked asphalt. I pulled my coat tighter and stepped into the night, declining the temptation to call a car service. It was only 15 minutes to my apartment. The first few blocks passed quietly empty sidewalks, storefronts locked for the evening, the distant hum of tires slicing through puddles. Seattle's familiar spring rain wrapped around me like a damp blanket. Then, in an instant, headlights blinded me. Too fast. Too close. Metal shrieked. My body jolted as the impact slammed me sideways. The world spun, once, twice, before an abrupt, crushing stop. I smelled gasoline. I heard the faint hiss of steam. Pain seared through my chest and skull, a blinding white heat that pushed me toward unconsciousness. Sirens wailed, growing louder as red and blue lights fractured across the broken glass. I felt hands on me, paramedics moving quickly, voices muffled as if underwater. Female, late 20s. GCS 6. Blunt trauma to the head and chest. BP dropping. I wanted to speak, to tell them I was here, I was listening, but my lips wouldn't move. My limbs were heavy. Darkness pulled at me. The next thing I knew, I was floating somewhere between awareness and nothingness. Light filtered in through a haze. Voices whispered like echoes across a canyon. She's in a medically induced coma, a woman's voice said, calm but serious. Significant intracranial pressure. We need consent to proceed with surgery. I heard the shuffle of papers, the sterile beeping of monitors. Then, the arrival of familiar voices, colder, sharper than the clinical tones. William. Eleanor. What exactly are you doing for her? My father asked, his voice clipped. We've stabilized her for now, the doctor responded. But without surgery to relieve the swelling, her chances are minimal. We require consent to operate. There was a pause. Then my mother spoke, her tone so practiced it might have been mistaken for concern by someone who didn't know her. There's been a misunderstanding, she said smoothly. You see, Olivia isn't legally our daughter. The adoption was informal. The papers were never properly filed. Even in my fragile state, her words sliced through me like glass. The doctor's voice cooled. She has you listed as her emergency contacts. Her records state otherwise. She's not our responsibility, my father added flatly. We owe her nothing. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. My mind screamed against the paralysis. I was here. I heard everything. How could they after all these years? After the photo ops, the dinners, the polished smiles? The doctor held her composure. Without family authorization, we'll proceed under emergency provisions. The law allows us to act in the patient's best interest. I strongly advise you reconsider contacting us further, my mother said coolly. We won't be held financially responsible for this. Their footsteps receded. The door clicked softly behind them. The quiet that followed was somehow louder than their cruelty. Moments or maybe hours later, another voice entered. I've never seen anything like it, a nurse whispered softly. Their own daughter. Rich people, the doctor muttered in response. Call legal. See if there's anyone else we can notify. The days that followed blended into each other, or maybe it was only hours. I had no way to tell. My body remained motionless, but my mind floated somewhere just beneath the surface, catching snippets of conversations, the hum of machines, the soft rhythm of my own heart trying desperately to hold on. Then came a voice that didn't feel clinical. It was warmer, softer. Hey there, Olivia. I'm Emily. I'm your nurse today. Her voice became a steady current in my isolated world. She spoke to me during every shift, describing the sunny mornings, the patients on her floor, even snippets of hospital gossip. I don't know if you can hear me, she'd say, adjusting my four. But I believe you can. And you're not alone, okay? Not while I'm here. She even played music, a playlist. She said her younger sister curated for her gentle acoustic covers that filled the sterile room with a hint of life. Your vitals are stable today, Emily said once, carefully wiping my forehead. That's a good sign. You're fighting. When Rachel arrived at the hospital days later, I felt it like a shift in the air. Her voice, panicked but determined, cut through the fog. How could they abandon her? She demanded of the staff. I'm her legal partner. I'll authorize whatever's necessary. Just save her. Rachel moved mountains in the days that followed, navigating legal paperwork, arguing with hospital administration, and standing guard against my parents' attempts to interfere further. She became my shield when I couldn't defend myself. Time stretched and blurred, but eventually, the swelling in my brain subsided enough for surgery. I was wheeled into the bright, cold operating room, flashes of light strobing above me before the world finally went black. When I opened my eyes again, it was gradual, like surfacing from deep water. The brightness stung, my throat burned from the breathing tube, my body ached as though it had been run over again and again. But I was alive. Emily's face appeared above me, her eyes shining with relief. Welcome back, Olivia. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. But I heard everything, and I would not forget. They abandoned me once. They didn't realize I would live to confront them. The early spring air in Seattle carried that familiar damp chill, but inside the physical therapy room, I was drenched in sweat. Each movement was a battle, small, painful victories against my broken body. My ribs still ached with every breath, my left leg trembled as I tried to balance, and the world occasionally spun when I lifted my head too quickly. You're doing great, Olivia, my physical therapist encouraged, steadying my arm. I clenched my jaw, focusing on the next step. Pain had long since become background noise. My real fight was no longer physical. Every day, Emily visited, her familiar voice offering gentle updates, bits of humor, and quiet support that I hadn't known I needed. And every evening, Rachel arrived with files, legal documents, and news that made my stomach tighten. They filed the petition this morning, Rachel said softly one night as she laid papers on my bedside table. They're claiming you're mentally incompetent to manage Dorothy's estate. My parents hadn't lost any time. Even as I lay in a hospital bed fighting for my recovery, they were fighting for control, not of my well-being, but of Dorothy's home, her assets, her memory. I closed my eyes briefly, trying to steady my breath. Of course they did. Rachel leaned in, her voice dropping. They think you're too weak to stop them. They're wrong, I whispered. A few days later, Henry Morgan arrived. He was Dorothy's longtime attorney, a man with silver hair, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a calm presence that felt oddly comforting. Miss Parker, he greeted me with a nod, setting his briefcase gently beside my bed. First, let me say how pleased I am to see you recovering. Your grandmother would have been proud. He slid a thick envelope into my hands. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it, revealing several neatly stacked documents and a handwritten letter in Dorothy's graceful script. My dearest Olivia, the letter began, if you're reading this, it means I have failed to tell you what I should have said long ago. Her words unfolded gently, explaining what my parents had always denied. My birth mother, Dorothy's niece Caroline, had been young, frightened, and unable to raise a child. Dorothy had arranged for my adoption within the family, hoping to keep me close. But my parents, unexpectedly pregnant with Sophie soon after, had never fully accepted me. I thought keeping you close would mean you'd be loved fully, Dorothy wrote, but I underestimated their hearts. Tears welled up as I traced her words with my fingertips. Attached were my adoption papers, birth certificate, and legal confirmations that demolished my parents' lies. "You have every legal right to your inheritance," Henry assured me gently. "Their claims won't hold." I exhaled slowly, feeling the truth settle into my chest like a long-held weight finally being placed on solid ground. "They've spent their whole lives pretending I don't belong," I said softly. This proves I always did." Henry nodded, his voice steady. "And now we have the documentation to prove it, both to the court and to them." But truth alone wasn't enough. Not this time. In the following weeks, with Rachel, Henry, and Emily's help, we gathered every shred of evidence. Hospital records, medical reports, and most importantly, the security footage Emily had discreetly flagged, capturing my parents refusing to authorize treatment, denying me as their daughter. Rachel set up the video on her laptop one evening in her apartment, the screen illuminating both our faces as my parents' cold voices played back. "She's not our daughter. We owe her nothing." I watched the footage in silence, feeling rage pulse beneath my skin, but not uncontrollably. It was focused now. Sharpened. "It's all here," Rachel whispered. "Everything the court needs." "But this isn't just for court," I said. "I need them to see it too. All of it." That night, I began writing the letter. I must have rewritten it 20 times over the following days. At first, it was raw, burning with anger, laced with all the words I had swallowed for years. But with every draft, the tone shifted. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, about release, about finally taking back my voice. I wrote of the years I spent trying to earn their love, of the nights filled with doubt and the mornings fueled by perfectionism. I wrote of the moment in the hospital when I heard them leave me for dead. I wrote of Dorothy's truth, of Caroline's sacrifice. And in the end, I forgave them not because they deserved it, but because I refused to carry the weight any longer. When I finally sealed the envelope, my hand hovered briefly before signing the back. "Olivia Parker." "You don't get to control the story anymore," I whispered. The next morning, Henry arranged for the letter to be placed on the dining room table inside Dorothy's house. Security cameras were already installed throughout the property, discreetly positioned to capture every expression, every word that would unfold when my parents arrived. Saturday at 2 p.m., their reckoning would finally arrive. They thought they were walking into victory. Instead, they stepped into the truth. The clock on Rachel's laptop read 1:58 p.m. The security feed streamed smoothly, the interior of Dorothy's house looking frozen in time. The antique sideboard, polished to a soft sheen, reflected the afternoon light filtering through lace curtains. On the dining table sat the letter, waiting, and beside it, Dorothy's old cinnamon rolls, untouched and cold. Rachel sat beside me on the couch, her hand resting gently on my arm. Henry Morgan stood nearby, silent but focused, his sharp eyes glued to the screen. "They'll be here any moment," Rachel whispered. I simply nodded. My breath was steady, but my heart was a drumbeat in my chest. At precisely 2:03 p.m., the black Mercedes pulled into the driveway. My father stepped out first, glancing around as though surveying property he had already claimed. My mother followed, adjusting her designer sunglasses as she walked toward the front door. Sophie trailed behind, her steps slower, her expression tight and unreadable. Inside the house, the cameras caught my father struggling briefly with the front door. "The key isn't working," he grumbled. "Did you try the back door?" my mother suggested, irritation rising. "I shouldn't have to try the back door. This is my mother's house." Sophie corrected softly. The locksmith arrived moments later, unlocking the door after a brief exchange of paperwork. My father barely acknowledged him as he strode inside, my mother gliding in behind him. Sophie hesitated at the threshold, then stepped into the home she hadn't visited since Dorothy's funeral. The first words out of my father's mouth struck like a match. "Everything looks exactly the same." "Mother always did have excellent taste," my mother added, fingers trailing across the crystal vase on the sideboard. "This will look perfect in our foyer." Sophie's brows furrowed. "We're here for family mementos, not redecorating." "Don't be naive," my mother snapped, her polished facade slipping for just a moment. Olivia, will never recover enough to claim this estate. The judge will see reason. Everything here will belong to us soon enough." "She's in physical therapy now," Sophie interjected. "Her doctors say she's progressing." My father scoffed as he descended the staircase. "Her brain injury is another matter. The legal guardianship petition is strong. The judge will have to consider long-term care." Rachel's hand tightened on my arm. "They have no idea what's waiting for them," she murmured. On screen, the family moved toward the dining room. My mother's eyes landed on the envelope immediately. "What's this?" my father asked, lifting the sealed letter. My name, written in Dorothy's familiar handwriting, faced the camera. "It's addressed to Olivia," Sophie noted. "Well, she's not here, is she?" my mother said sharply, snatching the envelope and tearing it open without hesitation. As she began reading, the color drained from her face. My father leaned over, reading along, his features hardening with each word. "This is outrageous," he barked finally. "Lies. Manipulations." "What does it say?" Sophie pressed, reaching for the letter. My father pulled it away, but she snatched it before he could react. Her eyes scanned the pages quickly. I watched the realization build in her expression, like dawn breaking behind storm clouds. "Mom, Dad," she whispered, voice cracking. "You left her to die?" My mother's voice faltered. "It wasn't like that. We were in shock. The doctors were pessimistic. It says here you told the hospital she wasn't your real daughter. That you owed her nothing." My father's composure slipped into a defensive snarl. "That statement's being taken out of context." "Out of context?" Sophie repeated, her voice growing steadier. "You told the hospital staff to let her die. There were complicated legalities surrounding the adoption." "No," Sophie cut him off. "There weren't." She held up the enclosed legal documents. "You signed these adoption papers. You raised her for 28 years. She is your daughter legally and otherwise." I watched from Rachel's apartment, the breath caught in my throat. My sister, for the first time, was seeing the truth unfold. "All those years," Sophie continued, tears rising in her eyes. "The favoritism, the distance. I thought you were just strict with her. I didn't realize," her voice broke, "that you never saw her as yours." My mother straightened her back, voice turning cold. "We gave her everything. The best education, the best home. Most adopted children would be grateful." "Except love," Sophie whispered. "You gave her everything but love." On the screen, my father's jaw tightened. "That's enough, Sophie." "No," she said firmly. "It's not enough. It's never been enough." My mother clutched at her necklace, her voice defensive. "We were practical. We made the hard decisions." "You abandoned her," Sophie said, voice flat now. "You walked out of that hospital room. You chose money over your daughter's life." I saw the exact moment the parental mask shattered. The charm, the performance, the layers of self-deception gone. What remained was pure self-preservation. "We need to contact Gerald," my father muttered, pacing the room. The letter can't hold up in court. The video is authentic, Sophie finished, pulling out her phone. I already watched it. She pressed play, and their voices echoed through the room once more, cold, clinical, undeniable. My parents stood frozen as their own words filled the silence. We'll claim it's edited, my father said quickly. Deepfakes are common. We'll find an expert witness. This is a nightmare, my mother whispered, sinking into one of Dorothy's dining chairs. We've lost control. No, Sophie said, her voice steady, eyes glistening. You've lost me. The words hit harder than any accusation. My mother inhaled sharply, blinking as though blindsided. My father's face twisted into something unrecognizable, not anger, but fear. You're siding with her? He asked, his voice quieter now, as though bargaining. I'm siding with the truth, Sophie answered. For a long moment, no one moved. My parents stood amid Dorothy's carefully preserved home, the very place they had sought to claim, but they no longer owned the narrative. Rachel exhaled beside me, her voice barely a whisper. It's done. I wanted to believe it was. But as I stared at the live feed, I knew this was only the first rupture. The storm may have broken their masks, but the debris still swirled. Then my phone buzzed. A new message. From Sophie. Olivia, can we meet? Please. Some people share your blood. Others share your heart. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined. Quiet, almost intimate, with rows of polished wooden benches and the faint echo of papers rustling. The judge's gavel tapped once, signaling the end of it all. The probate court finds Dorothy Parker's will valid and binding. The petition for conservatorship is hereby denied. Furthermore, the subsequent lawsuit filed by William and Eleanor Parker for emotional distress is dismissed with prejudice. The words hung in the air like a final chord in a long, dissonant symphony. Beside me, Henry nodded with quiet satisfaction, while Rachel squeezed my hand gently. Sophie sat behind us, her face composed, but her eyes shining. My parents, seated at the opposite table, remained stone-faced. My father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched tight, while my mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue, whether out of genuine emotion or performance, I couldn't say. The truth, however, no longer required my interpretation. It stood on record now, public and undeniable. As we filed out of the courtroom, reporters lingered at the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing under the bright spring sun. The details of the case had already begun to circulate, not just the legal facts, but the moral ones. Parker family scandal widens. Seattle couple accused of abandoning adopted daughter during medical crisis. Estate battle exposes decades of family deception. The headlines weren't mine to write, but I no longer feared them. A week later, word quietly spread that my parents had left Seattle. No interviews, no press conferences. Just silence, like a curtain falling on a play that had run too long. Life, however, was far from silent inside Dorothy's house, now my home. The renovation had been a labor of both restoration and renewal. We kept the bones intact, the intricate woodwork Dorothy loved, the stained glass windows that cast rainbows across the parlor floor in the morning light, and of course, the familiar porch swing. But the house breathed differently now. Softer, warmer. Sophie had moved into the East Wing a few months earlier. Just temporarily, she'd insisted at first. But temporary had gently become comfortable. Slowly, we navigated a delicate rebuilding of sisterhood, one honest conversation at a time. Rachel visited often, her laughter filling the kitchen as we experimented with Dorothy's old recipes. Emily, having transferred to a home health agency, became part of our regular Sunday brunches. Henry, though technically my lawyer, had long since graduated to family friend, staying for cinnamon rolls rather than legal paperwork. One year after the accident, I hosted a small gathering, nothing grand, just the people who had stood beside me when it mattered most. We gathered around the dining room table, the very same table where my parents once read my letter. But tonight it held steaming dishes, mismatched plates, and the kind of easy laughter that filled spaces better than any polished decor ever could. Rachel clinked her glass softly. To family, she toasted. Chosen family, Emily added with a smile. I looked around at them, each one here not because of obligation, but because of choice. To family who show up, I said quietly, raising my glass. When it matters most. The clinking glasses sang softly, blending with the hum of conversation and clatter of plates. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the house grew still, Sophie found me on the porch swing, just as Dorothy used to. The spring breeze carried the faint scent of lilacs from the garden, and the sky faded gently into dusk. She hesitated for a moment before sitting beside me. Do you think about them? She asked quietly, her eyes scanning the horizon. I let the question settle, feeling its weight and its release all at once. I smiled softly. No, not anymore. The swing creaked gently as we sat together, letting the silence say the rest. As Sophie and I sat quietly on the old porch swing, I realized how far we had come, two sisters, finally choosing each other. Life doesn't always give us the family we hope for, but sometimes we are given the strength to build one of our own. Love isn't about shared blood. It's about who shows up, who listens, who stays when it matters. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own journey, I invite you to share your thoughts or simply reflect on those who have become your chosen family. Thank you for being part of mine by listening.